Hey, thanks very much for having me. I feel like there needs to be some software for running these types of events where it's in person, remote, and everything else that comes with running a conference. It seems like there's different tools to kind of complete all of those things individually, but doing it all together is still a complex problem. And then we've got the internet to fix as well. So, yeah, someone will make a lot of money to figure that out. So I'm Jamie. I'm here today to talk about a product called GraphQL Mesh. If for those who don't know me, I'm Jamie, and I do training. I've recently started working with the Guild to provide kind of training through my own video tutorials and workshops and blogs and tutorials and that kind of thing. And if you're curious what NoTrap is there, it's just my surname backwards. I always get the question, what's your Twitter handle for? I can never pronounce it. It's just my surname backwards. So yeah, NoTrap. I've been working with GraphQL for a while. Some of the people in the room there with you, probably I've met a few back in the early days of working with GraphQL, and I'm still happy that we're all still here, and we've kind of got through the early days of that, and now kind of still running events like today around GraphQL. So fantastic to be a part of it. Thanks very much for inviting me. And just to kind of end the intro on myself, I do weekly GraphQL videos about specific topics that solve day-to-day problems or working with day-to-day solutions in GraphQL. So enough of the history, enough of the self-promotion. I will get on to the Guild. And most of the talk today will be around tools that the Guild have either built or maintain today. The Guild is a group of open source developers that are committed to sustainable open source, rather. They're all of the members of the Guild are experts with GraphQL. There's members coming on. There's members still part of the group that maybe have moved on or have their own kind of companies and consultancies, similar position to my own, where I'm providing content, but collectively I can work with the members of the Guild to continue to improve the GraphQL, the tooling, the support, the documentation, tutorials, and all that kind of thing. So yeah, if you've used GraphQL on the client, in the back end, wherever, you've probably used some of the tools of the Guild and what they are building. Whether that be with Svelte, Swift, React, Vue, and some server frameworks, then yeah, you probably came across some of the tools. I'd highly recommend that you head to the website to check out all of their solutions and services. Another part to the Guild as well is consultancy, training, workshops, mentorship, technical support, all that kind of stuff, where we can kind of be there to kind of give you the support you need to run your business with GraphQL. But yeah, I'm mostly focused on creating content on GraphQL and sharing that with thanks to the Guild. I want to just briefly talk on it very quickly about something that was announced yesterday. If you're working with Svelte, which is an increasingly popular tool for building web apps, websites, whatever. If you want to use GraphQL, there is a new library or a collection of two libraries, Houdini and KitQL, that was recently kind of updated to work together to provide the best experience with working and with Svelte and GraphQL. So if you've been kind of trying out Svelte like myself and other frameworks, then we believe this is the best experience, and you can learn all about that at the website on the blog. And also, I wasn't here last month. I had to. I actually had COVID last month, so I wasn't able to attend to speak. But I'm very grateful to be invited back. But back then, last month, I wanted to just mention that there is a GraphQL performance monitoring and schema registry service that is the Guild's first SaaS product that's now available for you to try out. So I can talk and answer questions about that later if anybody's interested. But again, I'd recommend that you head to the site to learn more about that. So enough of all of that. I want to talk to you all today about three tools and how you can use them today, how they've been used in the past, and how they've all came together to build something new. So let's move on to the first thing. This is the GraphQL code generator. You've most likely used the GraphQL code generator in your projects to create types from your GraphQL schema. This is a tool that you can use to generate code for the front end and the back end. You can generate types from your schema and the operations that you create within your project. It even works with things like Urkel or Apollo, React, Vue, Svelte, and many others. And you can generate the type document nodes that you can use to pass to any one of these libraries, or you can automatically generate the code and the functions and the hooks for the queries, mutations, and whatever else you need. And the GraphQL code generator can do all of that by kind of introspecting your schema and figuring out, okay, this is a string, and it can kind of associate that with your TypeScript types and generate all of those, including things like your different scalar types and many others. So if you're interested to learn more about the GraphQL code generator, I'd encourage you to check out the website to learn more about that. The next thing that I want to talk very briefly about is the GraphQL Tools project. GraphQL Tools is a set of utilities that have been around for a while. They were originally maintained by another group of developers, but the library was taken over by the Guild, who kind of updated this and added a bunch of new things that allowed you to build schemas with GraphQL. It allowed you to kind of bring in directives, bring schema using the SDL, and generate these executable schemas for GraphQL for use in your servers and front end and whatever else. It also had tools to mock those schemas as well. So whether you wanted to provide some kind of mock data for type definitions you haven't even implemented resolvers for yet, that's possible with something like GraphQL Tools. And you can generate those mocks on a per type basis as well, which is pretty cool. And the other thing was that's quite big of the GraphQL Tools packages is there's utilities there to stitch regular or the Apollo Federation services. So you don't have to kind of pick one or the other. Do I use Federation or not? You can continue to use Federation and stitch together other tools with some of the GraphQL tool utilities. And you can also stitch together multiple schemas into one API. So you may have heard in the past that schema stitching is dead. Everybody's moved to Apollo Federation and we're all federating services in different ways. Well, that's not true. There's still a lot of tools that allow you to kind of change and augment how your GraphQL schema works. And that's part of the GraphQL tools. We can wrap, we can rename, we can transform entire or individual services of your GraphQL schema. And it can also handle loading remote or local schemas. Those schemas could be defined or exported in different file types. It's able to kind of pluck those out, bring all of that together, and build a GraphQL schema that we can use. The next thing I wanted to talk about, which is what I wanted to dedicate a full 20 minutes to in the last talk, is something called GraphQL Yoga. Now, Tim in the room probably recognizes this. This was a tool that was historically put together and built by Prisma. And over the years, that library kind of became stale, abandoned, and it wasn't very well maintained. That's just because the company that was managing it before kind of moved on and looked to kind of build more abstract things on top of GraphQL, which is totally fine. But it left this huge void. A lot of people were migrating to other GraphQL servers, but people were still doing the same old thing that GraphQL Yoga originally tried to fix, which was to bring in all of the different things that people wanted to do, such as file uploads, handling subscriptions, and adding kind of middleware plugin systems to this server. So you don't have to bring, if you're using a GraphQL server, you no longer have to kind of wire up these services individually. GraphQL Yoga aims to kind of build this production-ready GraphQL server out of the box with all of these features here. The biggest thing for me for GraphQL Yoga, though, is that the server is built around the HTTP request and response specification. So the web's moved on the last 2 to 3 years, and now we've kind of got this pretty much good standard that we all follow when handling with requests or responses. Before, the GraphQL Yoga package was kind of tailored in a way that only kind of worked with where it was deployed to in a node environment. But we've all moved on again since then. We're now doing a lot more in serverless and at the edge and in traditional node environments as well. So Yoga aims to kind of handle all of that with this very simple setup where it can kind of, it just works with the requests and responses, and it doesn't have to worry about too much on the runtime. So the other thing of GraphQL Yoga as well that I should mention is that it has extensive plugin support. So you can drop in any one of the envelope plugins. And if you're not familiar with that, there's tons of documentation at the website. So I encourage you to check that out. But just know, if you want to import plugins to augment how your GraphQL execution happens, you can do that with Yoga, and that's built in. That's how we intend you today to use the envelope plugin system. With envelope, you can hook into the parse, validate, and execution phases of GraphQL to do things before and after and change what you need to make GraphQL work the way that you need it to. And another thing that GraphQL Yoga comes with is this error masking. So if you're building a server with GraphQL, you've no doubt seen all of these weird errors come back. Maybe there's even a stack trace to your client, and you're trying to figure out, okay, why is this even here? I didn't want this error to occur. But with GraphQL Yoga, you can use some of the utilities built in to throw errors in a friendly way. So you can turn on error masking by default, which will exclude anything kind of being leaked to the GraphQL client, and you can just get a generic error back. But if you want to go a step further, you can kind of augment that error with some message that is a bit more human-friendly, or it conforms to some kind of I18 library that your client can parse and show the correct errors for. And then lastly, testing in GraphQL is not talked about too much. So I wanted to add this to the slide just to kind of get that in there, because I think it's important that we all test the services that we build. And especially if you're building a server in production with GraphQL Yoga, then you want to make sure that your users aren't going to run into little mistakes and typos that you've made. So testing with GraphQL Yoga is very easy with the built-in injection utilities that's there for testing and fetching data. You can learn a lot more about GraphQL Yoga. Like I say, I want to spend a bunch of time last time talking about this and going through all of the different examples here, but I just simply don't have the time today because there's another amazing speaker up next. So yeah, GraphQL code generator, GraphQL tools, GraphQL Yoga, GraphQL code generator, GraphQL tools, GraphQL Yoga. These are 3 separate services, but today we have one. This is GraphQL Mesh, and I'm going to talk to you about this. This is the ability to query anything and run it anywhere. So let's dive in. Just a quick preview into what a schema looks like for GraphQL Mesh. Here we have some sources defined, some plugins, and that's all I'm going to say for now. Mesh is this framework where your services don't even need GraphQL to build a GraphQL schema. Just let that sink in. We believe that you should control your data and your stack and have every bit of ownership around it. And when you don't, you should be able to connect it all with all of the different tools that we have available in the GraphQL space. And GraphQL Mesh is something that can kind of bring all of these things together and orchestrate the communication between everything. So what makes Mesh Mesh? Well, if we take all of our learnings from the GraphQL code generator, GraphQL tools, and GraphQL Yoga, we can do something here that allows us to take in some API, whether that be GraphQL or non-GraphQL, and build something that is GraphQL. Then we abstract all of that with the tools package by maybe wrapping or renaming individual or entire schemas. We can do that. Maybe we have some configuration that can then declare where this is run. Is it something that will be run on a server? Will it be my entire server? Or will this be an SDK that I use inside of my front-end framework? Then we have a CLI that can generate and do all of what I just said. It can generate these artifacts that you can use in your production environments. So how does it exactly work? What am I talking about here? Well, we can configure GraphQL Mesh. And if we just remember back to the code I was showing you for the configuration, we can configure our data sources. These data sources can be anything. We can define some custom types. We can define some custom resolvers if I want, and we can configure a custom server. So why would we use that? Well, we can take all of this together. We can take all of this configuration, then we can pass it to the build phase. Then that build phase can generate one GraphQL schema from all of these different data sources. We can then generate an SDK output if we wish, and we get TypeScript types for absolutely everything, which is amazing. It's even more amazing when you create TypeScript types for something that isn't GraphQL or has types originally. It's pretty amazing. Then we pass all of that build to then through the kind of the build CLI to build the artifacts, and we get this gateway or SDK. So back what I was saying about before, GraphQL Mesh composes sources as a single unified GraphQL schema. You can query absolutely anything. So some examples of GraphQL data sources. Whether you're using API, OpenAPI, Swagger, or Microsoft OData, gRPC, maybe you're using MySQL, or you're still stuck using SOAP. You can bring all of these together as your source handlers, and you can build one GraphQL schema, which is just amazing. So yeah, you can use all of these original protocols and use them as if they were GraphQL. One example that I used recently was Stripe. Stripe don't have a GraphQL API, but I want to interact with that data in a GraphQL way. Well, using a source handler, I can do that. GraphQL Mesh gives clients the ability kind of to work and talk GraphQL with services like as if they were GraphQL. So let's just talk about these data sources, right? So we could have a mobile application, we could have a web app, we could have a Node.js application, whatever it be. If we need to talk to one of these connected sources, we can go through the mesh. And the mesh handles that orchestration. It handles the communication between all of these different services, which is pretty cool. You can go to the gateway through an API that could be hosted, and it could be your own server that you go to. Or if you wanted to do it in the client, you can use the SDK with something like Next.js. You can just invoke a function, and it will avoid going through this kind of hosted API server, and it will just call your individual services directly in GraphQL with GraphQL, which is cool. And those underlying services could be REST, they could be SOAP, they could be GraphQL, and it can talk as if they were GraphQL, which is just mind-blowing. So yeah, we can automatically create these type-safe GraphQL APIs from any data source, which is cool. And we can even extend one GraphQL API with the data from another. And another common example that I often see or often use when describing this that is very easy to imagine is we have an API that we can get countries. We can get the country name, the country code, latitude, longitude, but maybe we also want the weather. Well, if I'm making a request to get my countries, it would be really, really easy and for me to add weather data from another source. I can extend these resolvers and the types to use data from another. And those are fully type safe as well. When I'm kind of connecting one source to another and I extend the types and resolvers, I can do that within the GraphQL Mesh configuration. And it knows what to select using selection set, what data it needs to kind of create and run that response, which is pretty cool. So yeah, GraphQL Mesh allows me to kind of create this single unified GraphQL schema from GraphQL sources and non-GraphQL sources. And with what I was talking about with the envelope plugin system within Yoga, we can mock, cache, and apply transformations to the entire schema if we wanted to. So yeah, Mesh does really give you superpowers. So you can query anything and you can run it anywhere. You can run it as a gateway. This could be a server that you host, which is your Mesh server. The Mesh server could be your server. It could be your API. It could be everything you need. And you can run this as a separate service, or you could install it inside of your project. Maybe we've all seen the Next.js API routes. Maybe you want to use Mesh as a API route handler. You can do that with Mesh. You can get the artifacts and you can expose them over an API endpoint. Or if you just wanted to import the SDK, you can do that. You can import functions to execute any of the GraphQL operations that you need against your APIs. And if you, because of the, thanks to GraphQL Code Generator, all of this is type safe as well. You can generate all of your hooks for queries, mutations, and they are fully type safe. And if you're working with Svelte, React, Vue, Remix, whatever, you've got full type safety when you import all of those as well. So what's next for Mesh? What are we focused on doing? We want to simplify how configuration works. Right now, it's really easy. It's a YAML format that we can do to define how the schema looks. But you want to improve that with directives. We want to actually allow you to kind of build a GraphQL schema that you'd like, and then hook up directives to say, okay, this is where you can get the data from, which is going to be pretty cool. We also recently wanted to enable cross-platform support. So maybe it's providing mesh at the edge with Cloudflare workers. Well, we actually just landed support for this last week. So I'm pretty excited that that's there now. And that also has built-in caching support as well. So because we're at the edge with mesh, because we're at the edge with GraphQL workers, we can take advantage of the KV store. We can store and cache our requests with the KV store with mesh. And that's all kind of taken care of for you. And it doesn't, and there's no kind of configuration other than what you put in your mesh config. Finally, one thing that I kind of wanted to highlight on what we're focused on doing next is reducing the boilerplate and the kind of footprint that mesh has. So we want to reduce the bundle size for mesh. It's not too big right now, but as you can imagine, as you add more sources, it generates more artifacts, and that's something you've got to carry around with you. But we want to make this super easy and super lightweight that you can kind of just bring this around into any one of your projects, and it just works. There's so much more that we are doing as well, and there will soon be a public roadmap to kind of share all of this with everyone. Lastly, I just want to say that we can federate content from anywhere to anywhere, whether that be through our own API or through the SDK. And if we want to kind of federate all of these different sources, we no longer have to kind of opt into using federation to get the benefits of why we've all started to migrate to build on microservices and build in these federated services and have this kind of larger graph. We can take advantage of mesh to already have the same advantages of that, but let mesh take care of all of the heavy work. You don't need to migrate your code to anything other than where it is today. It can still live there. Even if it's not GraphQL, it can live there. And you can use mesh to kind of orchestrate and build this kind of federated content layer for all of your different sources, which is cool. And lastly, that just kind of means you can stay within the GraphQL ecosystem. If any of this has been interesting, by the way, I've got 2 videos on both of these approaches. You can use GraphQL Mesh as a gateway, and you can use GraphQL as an SDK, like I mentioned. And I have an example using Next.js. So check out my website on those 2 videos. You can find them on the homepage, and that kind of gets you started with GraphQL Mesh. Lastly, I just want to kind of move on to showing just very briefly the code for GraphQL Mesh. So maybe as we've got a few minutes, I can just kind of go through some of these examples. So right here, I have open a example for using OpenAPI and Stripe. So I mentioned this earlier on. And this here, we have a source that we've given a name of Stripe. And then we've given it this path for the specification. Then we've set the base URL. And then we've specified any operation headers. So here I can pass my bearer token for authenticating. And that's all I need. That's all I need to create a GraphQL schema from this specification. From that, I can then launch GraphiQL or GraphQL Playground, and we can make requests to this. Then I can generate all of the artifacts that I need to use it as an SDK as well, which is pretty cool. You can find out more about all of these different examples in the GitHub repository. And I also briefly mentioned Cloudflare workers. Here is an example of a kind of a function with GraphQL workers. Here we handle a request, we get our built mesh, we then instantiate a server, and we're using GraphQL Yoga. And then we kind of want to change the default behavior of GraphQL Mesh. So we can turn off error, or we can turn on we can turn off the built-in error masking. We can set things like a custom title for our graphical playground, and then we can add our plugins from the mesh system, which is pretty cool. Then finally, we can hand this over to Cloudflare workers to handle a request as that request and response. There's so much more inside of the repository here. Everything from using Neo4j, MySQL, Microsoft OData, Next.js, OpenAPI, SOAP, SQLite, Thrift, and so much more. There's so many examples in here on how you can use kind of all of these different things, and you can put all of them together to build one mesh. So hopefully you found this talk interesting. I'm happy to answer any questions about this. So yeah, how was that?
That was great. Thanks a lot. All right. Well, thank you, Jamie. I just got a microphone without batteries, I guess.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that. I mean, we got plenty of options, and I guess the best is the flexibility that this approach gives you when you want to use all these different APIs. So that seems a great alternative to just go and create these from scratch on your own. And also when you are integrating with other teams and other projects, that could be a really key advantage, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think working with, if you're in a team that's already using a project that maybe is in GraphQL, there used to be this kind of thing that we all used to say when trying to convince teams to move to GraphQL was, okay, if the front end team just kind of build this layer, then it forces the back end to move to GraphQL and and then go on to maintain that. But actually now, you as a front end developer don't need to do that. You can use the existing systems and get a GraphQL schema, which I think is just mind blowing. It's really cool.
Yeah, that also gives you that GraphQL is a solid foundation to build on top and create this GraphQL Mesh and other services that may come in the future. We are gonna skip the break just to try to get some of the time that we got the technical issues. And we are gonna go for just a couple of questions. So if you have a question, you can raise your hand. So we have a couple of questions here.
Hi, the great presentation. Thank you for that. So we in Merumi, we have this project that we join many REST endpoints to create one mutation, for instance. How can I do this in Mesh?
Yeah, fantastic question. Thanks for asking. I think what you could do is if you had some kind of OpenAPI or Swagger for these endpoints, you can generate those, or you can actually inside of your GraphQL Mesh configuration, you can specify what that endpoint is and what all of the resources are as well. So maybe if you don't have that Swagger or OpenAPI specification or anything else, you can define inside of the mesh config what that looks like, and it can then generate the types for that automatically, and then can handle the communication to and from and handle in any transformations you need. Does that answer your question?
So maybe I rephrase. In our case, one mutation that we want to create for our client, like a single page application, one mutation need to do two post requests to two different endpoints. How can I aggregate that with Mesh?
Okay, yeah, that's possible with Mesh by extending the resolvers for something in there. So you can create custom type definitions as well, and you can overwrite the resolver behavior for that. I think that would be a way that you could achieve what you're trying to do, or you could run multiple mutations from your client still.
Okay, thank you.
And I think there's another question just behind.
Hello, I saw you have a MongoDB integration. So does it make GraphQL exposed MongoDB database?
So it will introspect it, and you can kind of, again, you can customize using kind of what we've learned from GraphQL tools to mask and hide. So you can filter out what you don't want to go across or be exposed from any source, not just Mongo.
So if I use GraphQL Mesh with MongoDB, it would give me like a native driver of GraphQL for MongoDB?
I can't remember if it's the native driver or if it's just with the Mongoose schema right now. I would need to double check that. But if you didn't want to expose everything, you can just use kind of a whitelist for what you do want to expose.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so that's all. Thanks, Jamie, again for joining us. It's a little bit an effort to join remotely, but we are very thankful for that.
Yeah, I'll be there next time. Thank you.
Bye.